So welcome everybody. My name is Bruce Knight. I'm a pre-sales technical consultant at Bytes, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And so just take you through a bit of an overview, so a couple of slides, and then hopefully jump into a demo and give you a first-hand look at some of the capabilities built into Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and how you can onboard devices and take you through some of that functionality. So if we start off and just have a look at, I guess, a couple of things around, why potentially you'd want to move to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So I guess, one of the big things that most organizations like is that the fact that it's an agentless cloud-powered solution. So anything from Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows Server 2019 and up, it's not required to install any agent on that endpoint. You literally onboard the device, the sensor gets turned on and starts reporting data up into Defender for Endpoint. The other piece, unparalleled optics. So this is where, kind of consists of two components. It's the huge breadth of data that Microsoft has, based on the trillions of signals that they get from their services that they operate across Microsoft 365 and Azure. And then, the people that they hire. So they're cybersecurity experts and researchers that look at the macro trends, any new attacks that are out there affecting other organizations. And they leverage that insights and make it available to customers to be able to, identify and hopefully pick up these threats before they do any damage in their organization. And so that then leads on to the automated security piece. So that's, the ability for Microsoft to have a look at those alerts across the different attack sources and detection sources, and then create incidents to make it easier to investigate them, but also to kick off an automatic investigation as part of an alert that gets triggered to hopefully also remediate that alert before it can impact the rest of your organization. So isolates, quarantine a file, those kinds of activities can be done automatically. So Defender for Endpoint's come a long way over the years. I guess when it first came out, it was named Windows Defender or Windows Advanced Threat Protection, and that's because it was only Windows that it was supporting. But through the years, they've increased that across different platforms. So now, Mac OS, Linux, Android, iOS, obviously Windows Server, all supported platforms as devices that you can onboard into the service. And so they're constantly introducing new capabilities, new features, new OS platforms that they're supporting. So it's ever evolving and growing. So let's jump into what exactly you get with Defender for Endpoint. It kind of consists on those different components that you see across the screen. And so we'll jump into the first one, threat and vulnerability management. And so this is where, obviously once you've onboarded an endpoint into the service, that sensor starts to report all kinds of data into Defender for Endpoint. And so it understands which applications are installed on that device, how it's being configured, and then looks at, I guess, known vulnerabilities against those apps and mitigations that you can take to prevent your organization from being vulnerable to the way you've configured your device as well. So it'll recommend, if it finds an app that has a known vulnerability to you, you can look at the recommendation. Perhaps that's, just updating to the new version, or it'll look at the way your devices are configured and suggest known sort of attack surface reduction rules and capabilities that you can implement through this capability to be able to, harden your endpoints so that you're not vulnerable to those specific attacks that is picked up. So a really great tool. It's kind of a continuous report, so it's not like a point in time or snapshot view. If you update the app, it'll then show back into the portal, and you can track your remediations and recommendations as you start to roll them out in your organization. So that then leads us on to attack surface reduction. Certainly an important element. Obviously, if you can configure your device in a way that it's less vulnerable to attacks. That'll certainly help out moving forward. So Defender for Endpoint has some great reports and tooling to help you understand where you'd have the most impact and which attack surface reduction rules, if you turn them on, how would they impact devices in your organization. So we'll jump into a little bit more of this as we hit the demo, but some great capabilities here, and also some really nice integration with Intune to be able to quickly enable these ASR rules. But certainly you can still do things like use GPO or config manager to be able to implement your ASR rules. And just a view quickly on one of those reports that will show you the configuration of your endpoints, and then how you can start that recommendation, submit a ticket into Intune to get going with that rule. Next gen protection. So this is essentially the Defender antivirus component. So the piece on the actual endpoint that's hopefully will pick up any malicious activity or a malicious file that gets opened on that endpoint and block it before it starts to do any damage. So that's something you can set up and configure essentially as well through Intune. But it's kind of sort of consists of two different components here. There's the on-client piece, where we'll look at, I guess, some lightweight ML to understand hopefully if there's any anomalous behaviors happening when a user clicks on a file. But it's that typical, mostly it's going to be through known virus signatures. And if it's something that maybe doesn't understand on the client side of things, it'll send the metadata and even the file perhaps to the cloud sort of engines to then do some additional scanning, leverage the wider ML capabilities, and then hopefully block it from that perspective. So using that sort of two-pronged approach to help protect the endpoints before hopefully anything happens in your organization. So that's the Defend for AV side of things. But then, if I guess moving on to endpoint detection and response, so say it kind of opens a file, there's tasks starting to happen, there's anomalous behavior, so it wasn't stopped at the first sort of gates with the AV component. This is where the endpoint detection and response capabilities will kick in, and so look at some of those unusual behaviors happening on the endpoint, and then start to push those alerts into the Defender for Endpoint environment, and so it'll correlate all those alerts, create an incident, and then most of the times if it's going to have any effect, it'll kick off an investigation to then hopefully remediate that issue. But that's something we'll also showcase in the demo. So that then leads over into that auto investigation remediation component of Defender for Endpoint. So, that first part of collecting the alerts and information, creating incidents based on similar attack types or similar attackers. And then that will fire off a new investigation and start collecting all the necessary information on that endpoint. And then if it finds a malicious file or process, or see if it's created a strange scheduled task, for example, it would automatically remediate that on the endpoint, and then obviously highlight that to you through the Defender for Endpoint portal. By default, automation is turned on now for Defender for Endpoint on those endpoints that you onboard into the service, but you can still dial back the amount of auto investigation and remediation that you want to happen. So if you want to still be part of the approval process there, you can certainly dial it back a bit, and there's different levels of automation that you can choose in the service. And so then if we kind of lead off into the last sort of piece of those components, Microsoft Threat Experts is an additional service that you can sort of sign up to. So, for example, if there's an alert or an incident that you need some assistance with, you can ask a threat expert. There's an additional cost to get that expertise through Microsoft, but they can do sort of, I guess, like proactive types of analysis, as well as then if you do have an attack in your organization, to jump in there and help you investigate and hunt across the different sources to be able to hopefully help find and remediate anything that's happened in your organization. And so if we could just look below the line then, certainly over, I guess, the last year or so, Microsoft has been on this mission to kind of, I guess, bring all the Microsoft 365 Defender suite of products into that single dashboard. And so Defender for Endpoint is one of those, but it will look at obviously alerts from across Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, Identity, and MCAS, and bring them all now into that new security.microsoft.com dashboard, where you'll be able to see alerts and techniques that may have started in email and then come across and hit the endpoints. But a nice new dashboard to set up and configure and onboard devices, but it's also where you can go and look and investigate and do some hunting across those different suites of product in the Microsoft 365 Defender product. And then once again, the integration piece there, not just with the other Defender for Microsoft 365 suite of products, but also with things like Microsoft Intune, or Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and as mentioned there, especially with the recommendations piece, when you look into threat and vulnerability management, to be able to take on board a recommendation and then open a ticket into things like Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So whoever looks after and manages the endpoints through Intune, they'll see that ticket opened up there, and with the guidance on how to create a new attack surface reduction rule, for example, will show up to help them create that configuration profile and push it out to the endpoint. And then lastly, just the obviously APIs capability that Microsoft Defender has. I mean, you can certainly pipe out the data into different types of themes, and I guess Azure Sentinels is one of those as well. So the pre-built connectors, but also the ability to do things like leverage logic apps or Power Automate, for example, to be able to perhaps look at when a new alert gets triggered in your organization. Maybe you want to send that alert to Microsoft Teams, and then be able to click on an adaptive card in Teams to assign it to one of your users, and then go and investigate the threat. So lots of opportunities to integrate into Defender for Endpoint, across the Microsoft portfolio, or using APIs to do a bit more. And that could be to maybe open up a ticket in your service desk management tool, for example. And so that's the end of the slideware. So I will jump in now and just take you through Defender for Endpoint, and hopefully the demo all goes well, and you'll get a better understanding, I guess, of Defender for Endpoint. So let's have a look at security.microsoft.com. So this is that new unified portal. And when you jump into the home page here, you'll get some high-level information, so some useful sort of dashboarding info here, so you can get a quick view on any new incidents that have come in. And once again, this, although this is primarily we're going to talk about Defender for Endpoint, this now looks across the other components in the Microsoft 365 Defender suite. So you'll notice down the left-hand side here, there's the email and collaboration piece, there's endpoints, and that's, the endpoints piece is all the Defender for Endpoint stuff. But there's the email and collaboration components, and then reports across, and then also incidents and alerts will be across those different sources. So we'll certainly jump in there and have a little bit of a look. But before we, you start to get any meaningful information in here, you need to onboard your endpoints. And so if we look at how to do that, if you jump into settings, we go to endpoints, and then go down to onboarding. So here you'll see you can select the type of operating system you want to onboard, and this shows obviously the ones that are you can onboard into the service, so from Windows 7 up to Windows 11, Windows Server 2008 R2 and up, and then Mac OS, Linux, iOS, and Android endpoints. And so if you click on any of these, it will then show you the different types of deployment methods that are available for you to onboard those endpoints. I mean, certainly, I mentioned the tight integration with Intune here, so really easy to onboard devices through just creating a quick config profile, but you'll see if you do have Intune that the two work nicely together. But certainly, easy enough to still use things like GPO or config manager, for example, to be able to onboard those devices. And then similarly, if you click down to Windows Server elements, it'll give you some more information on how you can onboard those. And then moving across the stack here, you'll have a look and be able to see how to get those different devices onboarded into Defender for Endpoint, so that you can start to see what's happening on those endpoints. And once that's done, I guess the primary place that you're going to go to start to investigate anomalous behaviors would be incidents, because as I spoke about earlier, that's rather than jumping into alerts and trying to figure out out of all those alerts which ones kind of go together and which are from the same techniques that have been used or the same bad actor. Microsoft does this for you automatically and can correlate all those alerts into a single incident. It makes life a little bit easier when trying to hunt, and find what's going on with those specific alerts. So here you'll see I've got a list of incidents, and I can jump into one of these. So I've got this multi-stage incidents involving initial access and discovery. We'll have a look at that one to see what's happening from that perspective. So the first thing you'll notice is that you get this nice summary view, and this kind of looks at the alerts and categories across the MITRE attack framework. And so if you kind of highlight over this graph over here, it'll show you these alerts and how they fit into that attack framework from the MITRE attack framework. So I can see here there's been some initial access, some execution happening on those endpoints, some persistence, nothing from a privileged escalation point of view just yet. And then defense evasion, and you can go across the different bars here. And then here you get a nice timeline view of those alerts that make up this incident. So you can see here, maybe perhaps where it started and what sort of led up to create these different, this incident, for example. Another nice graphical view is you can click on the graph view over here and show you that same sort of timeline of alerts. And sometimes it's easy to just have a look at that attack story, so you can play that back and so see when that first alert came in, which entities were affected, which IP addresses, how many files are involved, which identity was involved in that specific incident as well. So it's always nice to visualize things a little bit. And then at any stage, on these graphs, you can sort of click on the three dots here and then look at the files, for example, and just pause that. So you can look at which files there were. So, if we jump into that, I can see which of the files that it did detect on those endpoints that, started triggering off those alerts. So, this is another way to go and start to investigate and look through what's going on with this specific incident. So we go back to summary. A little bit more information here around impacted devices and users, and then all the entities that are found as part of this this incident. So certainly, you may want to still jump into the specific alerts that make up this this incident, and so you can have a look, and Microsoft kind of gives it a severity level. So you might want to start with medium or high severity alerts. But it'll also then give you some information around that category again, the impacted entities. And so they're showing just from the endpoint for now. But if you did have, Defender for Office 365, for example, and maybe this incident kind of was triggered off from an email that came in, I'd be able to also see that, the mailboxes that were impacted for this specific incident as well. And then whether or not this alert's been assigned to anybody just yet on the far right hand side. So alerts and incidents can be assigned to individuals to have ownership of them. But when you click on a specific alert, let me just go back to this. Just want to have a look at a specific one here. So let's have a look at PowerShell dropped a suspicious file on the machine. So this certainly sounds a bit suspicious. So if you want to go in and just do, get a little bit more information on what exactly happened here and why this triggered off an alert, you can click on the alert. It'll show you those impacted entities once again, and then you get this really useful alert story that kind of takes you through the timeline point of view on what happened with this and why this alert was triggered. So we can see something sort of start off in Outlook, and then there was a PowerShell. So obviously there could be an email attachment that came in, the user clicked on it, and then there was some scripts that kicked off in the background. So PowerShell was launched. There was this WinATP file that looks a bit suspicious to me, and I can see here that Defender for Endpoint has picked it up as a suspicious file. So if I click on WinATP intro backdoor, I mean, obviously this is just me triggering off one of the simulations that you can run. But here I can see that if I click on the file, I'll get some more information down the right hand side. So some useful info around, I guess, that specific file, but also the SHAs, if I need them to create an indicator, and Defender for Endpoint to block them. The prevalence in the rest of the organization. So right now it's only on one other device in my organization, but worldwide, it's, this Defender for Endpoint has seen this quite a few times. And then some more information, and I can also then jump out to see where it was observed in my org, or open the actual file page for this file. So this will give me a bit more information. And once again, if I have a look here, I can see the prevalence. And if this, maybe this specific file was sent in as a weaponized document through email, I could then open this in Office 365 to do some more investigation around the email components, who the recipients are, and all kinds of useful information with that integration into Defender for Office 365. Once again, I can see the alerts again related to this file, where and when it was observed in the organization. So nice timeline view. And then also the ability to submit this for deep analysis. So you can then have a look to see, it takes a little bit of time, but not too long. And once you submit that in, you'll get this additional information on this file specifically. And so then I can have a look to see, communication. So, which IP addresses it was talking back to when it was triggered on that endpoint, and then lots of, additional information that be useful for me to understand exactly what's going on here. So really good to submit files for deep analysis and get a bit more info. So you'll see here once again, I guess depending on your level of automation, say, you didn't have automation turned on and the file wasn't quarantined through an investigation, I can stop and quarantine the file, but I can also add an indicator. So this will allow me to then block this file from any other endpoints that have been onboarded into Defender for Endpoint. So, if I go through the steps here to create an indicator, that will then load that up for me, and then prevent it from being a threat ever again. You can download the file, consult the threat experts. So some useful things you can do from the file point of view. But if we jump back into the incident again, so we kind of had looked at summary, alerts, and how you can jump into alert and get a better view on what happened with that specific alert. You can also see which devices were impacted. So say, for instance, maybe there was a couple of endpoints that were part of this incident. I'll be able to list out those different endpoints in here. And then you can also, perhaps you want to, jump into that endpoint to see, hey, maybe, what's going on with this specific endpoint. So rather than looking at it through the alerts that make up that incident, you want to pivot on the actual device and then do a bit more investigation, because I know this is, the only device so far that's been infected, and I want to just make sure there's nothing else going on that's potentially I need to be aware of. So if you click on the endpoints, you'll see some good information about that. Down the left hand side, I can see it's got a risk level of high. So there's obviously been lots of active alerts and incidents associated against this endpoint, which has moved that risk level up. Nice thing is you can integrate this risk level with things like Microsoft Endpoint Manager and conditional access to say when a risk level of a machine is medium or higher, to then block access to resources in Office 365. And I can then put that to alerts specifically for this endpoint, and that will then list all those out. I can go to this timeline view, which will show me events across a specific time period. So this will be all types of events, not just events that trigger off alerts. but all events on this endpoint. And so that's obviously going to be quite extensive, but I can, do things like filter this to maybe only see file events. Obviously, we know that there was that malicious file that was dropped on that device, so maybe I want to just pivot it to only see file events, and over that specific period of time. And so then I can start to, look through all the different file events, and it'll highlight some information towards the right hand side as well. If it's, Microsoft or Defender for Endpoints has picked up any suspicious activity on those specific events. And then at any stage, you can click on any one of these to get a bit more information. And so if you wanted to also do things like narrow down the search a bit, I can do things like say, well, I just want to find any sort of maybe documents that were opened on this endpoint or downloaded on this endpoint, just to narrow down the search for me to make it a bit easier. And at the top here, I'll be able to see when there were specific alerts triggered in the timeline as well. So now I've narrowed it down a bit, I can have a look at a little bit more detail around any Word documents potentially that were clicked on. So here I can see Outlook executed this WinATP intro invoice.docm file. Here's, I guess, probably where the initial access happened. So just downloaded an email attachment. I click on that, get a bit more information about this specific event. I can click on that entity, and then once again, open that file page, get a bit more information about this specific file again. Or maybe I want to go and hunt, and so I can then jump out into things like advanced hunting to be able to go and find this file and other endpoints and other sources across my organization. So, I want to look through SharePoint, OneDrive, mailboxes, all other entities as well to see if it's found this file anyway. So I can certainly jump out of this and open the file page and do more from here. It's going to jump back into the incident again. So next, moving on, obviously let's go to users here. You can also see which identities were impacted by this specific incident that we're looking at. And so I can see Ligu, obviously the user that was impacted by this incident, and I can open up his profile and see there's been quite a few activities, malicious activities that have happened on this user. So now we're kind of pivoting to the identity point of view as well. And I can see that and start to investigate some other components, but sort of take a different view. The nice thing is if, for example, you also have Defender for Identity, perhaps you deployed in your organization, and that's looking at your on-premise Active Directory signals. I could pick up things like lateral movements, based on some of those signals as well. So there'll be like a lateral movement path that I could see over here. So just some, once again, that integration with other capabilities. Mailboxes. So for this specific incident, no mailboxes impacted. But if we move across now to investigation, so these are triggered, by these some of these suspicious alerts. So we had a look at one of those alerts where PowerShell dropped a suspicious file on the machine. But if I come across now into investigations, I can click on one of these to see what exactly happened and how the EDR capabilities and that automatic investigation and response capability kicked in when it picked up that anomalous behavior on the endpoint, and then hopefully was remediated. So in this instance, I can see that alert was received. An incident with when investigation started, it started to analyze all the entities on that endpoint and gathered all the necessary information. It found some evidence, so those files that we can have a look at the evidence there, and then quarantined the WinATP intro.backdoor.exe file. So that was remediated. So happy that hopefully any further malicious intent would be stopped. But if I wanted to sort of dive through in a little bit more detail on what this investigation, what alerts triggered it off, which devices were impacted, and then once again that evidence that it found on that endpoint and which was remediated, and then look through some additional entities in here as well, and then obviously the log. So exactly how and what this investigation did on the endpoints and by collecting information, tasks and those kinds of things. The nice thing is you can also go to the action center here. So, if you don't have a high level of automation, you'd see as part of that investigation that maybe turned on, that you'd have a pending action. And so your pending actions you'd be able to see here as well, and then you can approve any pending actions. But if you go into history now, I can see that as part of that investigation, so there was some automation that happened to quarantine the file. But if, for example, maybe it was a false positive, you can always jump in here and then undo that specific quarantine remediation task. Or I can also go and do things like maybe I want to go and hunt, and that'll jump me out into the advanced hunting and have like a pre-built query that I can start to use to find more information about that specific detection, for example. And so there I can see that it's found that WinATP intro backdoor on that specific device, but maybe there's been some additional endpoints that it's been discovered on, and that will list that out, and I could modify this query slightly. This uses KQL, so if you're familiar with KQL, you can build and expand upon this. Maybe you want to find any endpoints that have this file detected on it, and potentially also that .docm file that I showed you earlier on. So you could expand this to be a bit of a wider search. The nice thing is you could also do things like in advanced hunting, maybe you want to see, have something that looks for when an email comes in and then a user potentially clicked on a link and then there was a file downloaded within minutes after that. And so you could create that advanced query and then maybe create a detection rule to say, well, if I find that kind of activity on an endpoint again, then hit me with an alert. And so it's nice to be able to bring that in and create your own detection rules as well. So that's, I guess that investigation piece where you'll go and start to look at incidents and alerts and do some advanced hunting to find more information potentially. An action center. There's also threat analytics, which is a great place to go and see, some of those new threats and attacks that are out there. And so this will also show you, if you have any devices or endpoints in your organizations that may be vulnerable to these types of attacks, or if you have any current alerts active against these kinds of attacks. And so you can have a look at some of these threats, but the nice thing is you can jump into one and get lots of information about that specific threat. And so, there's an overview, so it tells you a bit more about this type of threat, and then also shows you if you have any related incidents against this one, any alerts, any misconfigured devices. So this is, I can see there's 4 devices that are potentially vulnerable to this specific attack. And so I can take action on that as well. So I can, view the mitigation details, and then take that recommendation on by, some attack surface reduction rules or some configuration of on the endpoint from an AD perspective. I can do that. But this analyst report is really useful as well. So, this is kind of like a living document that, the threat experts keep up to date. And so you'll be able to read through all the content in here, get a better understanding on how it works and what it does. But then also list out those mitigations for you. And it'll show you, if there's been any changes or updates to this specific threat in your organization, or any of the information that's been changed in here. So really useful to look at this. But then if you did have related incidents or impacted assets in your organization specific to this, you'll be able to view them in here. But the nice thing is, once again, there's the mitigations that you can take to prevent against this. So this will list those out. And then I can take those on board. So if it's a ASR rule, for example, I can click over there. It will open up that recommendation, and then as mentioned earlier on in the slide, where it'll also give me a view on what that impact would be if I did enable this ASR rule in my organization. So I can take this on, open the remediation option, click through to next, open a ticket in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, select a date for remediation, give it a priority, add some notes, click next, and that will create that remediation, which then I can also track to see, say there's 4 devices that needs to happen on. I'll be able to see, when those devices get updated with that ASR rule, and it'll show me that, now there's only 3 or 2 devices exposed for this specific threat. But we'll get into a bit more of that with the TDM component in a second. So that's the threat analytics piece, really useful information in there. But if we jump down now to vulnerability management, this is where you can have that dashboard view. So as mentioned, the sensors report up all the data of those devices onboarded into the service and looks at the applications and also the OS, the way it's been configured, and then we'll look against known vulnerabilities and then give you an exposure score. So if you have lots of apps with known vulnerabilities and maybe you're on older builds of Windows that haven't been updated in a while, you're going to have quite a high exposure score. But if you keep your devices and endpoints up to date and the applications on them, and you've enabled the majority of the attack surface reduction rules, then certainly your exposure score is going to come down. But you'll be able to see the top security recommendations. And so, I can see I've got an outdated Notepad++ app installed on 3 devices, and I can see what the known sort of vulnerabilities against that. And then I can click through here to show more and get a better view. But let's just quickly look through this, the rest of the dashboard. So you'll see an exposure score or distribution in your organization, remediation activities that I've currently got open, and I can track against those, and top vulnerable software and exposed devices. So if I wanted to maybe just dive a little bit deeper into recommendations, I can click show more, and that will then give me a nice view on all the recommendations across my endpoints. So this looks at once again the OS, the apps, the way it's been configured, and then gives me that information. And so if I click into one of these again, similar to how I showed you through the threat insights piece, I can have a look at the impact in my organization and then request that remediation, which would then take me through that little UI to be able to open a ticket. But then we'll also create a new sort of item here under remediation, so I can track my progress against these. So I can see I've got quite a few in progress still. I've got some that have been completed. So I've taken on board some of these configuration changes, but I still have a few outstanding here that maybe, we haven't had a chance to deploy those ASR rules or updated the applications. But once they do, the nice thing is this is like real-time a tool, not a point in time or snapshot view. So when an app gets updated, when a device gets reconfigured, that'll then update, and I'll be able to see that reflection in the remediation activities over here, which is really good. So then if we click down to software inventory, we'll see that sort of pivot on the software and the apps installed on the endpoints. And once again, weaknesses will show, all the CVEs and vulnerabilities in my organization. So just another way to pivot and look at weaknesses specifically to your org. And then an event timeline. So if I wanted to maybe view vulnerabilities over the last week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I can do that in a timeline view instead. And just before we close off, just one more component that I wanted to point out from a Defender for Endpoint perspective. So obviously, there's some great reports you can jump into. I didn't mention in too much detail the web protection piece, but the nice thing is about this is you can create content filtering policy to block your endpoints from being able to browse through to different, obviously, websites based on category. And so you can create a policy. If I click on policies over here, I've got one created called block the bad stuff. And so in here, I can see, there's specific categories that I wanted to block on. And so if one of my onboarded devices tries to get to one of these, it'll block them. They'll be able to see that they can't click through to it and on the endpoint, but I'll also get the reports on the front end to be able to see some more information around, any attempts to access malicious URLs or any of those web requests. I can jump into the detail, have a look at the categories that, my end users have been browsing through to. And so even if I haven't blocked on specific categories, I can still see the websites that they've been visiting on those categories, the domains. And if I click onto, these specific ones, I'll be able to get a bit more detail as well to see which potential users, for example, or endpoints, sorry, that have been browsing through to those those websites, for example. So yeah, I can see YouTube accessed by this endpoint. So in this feature, I think, came out of preview a little while ago, and they're sort of getting some traction, and that's a really useful information. But lots of other reports as well that you can look at. And that, I guess, brings me to the end of the demo. Certainly, if you'd like to know a bit more, reach out to your Bytes account manager. We can sort of get a one-to-one session or workshop going to dive into a little bit more detail if need be. But I hope you enjoy the rest of the Bytes Summit. And thank you very much for your time today.